Japan-China tensions, because there is a lot to cover into this. And given your background in history, I figured we'll start with the island, the history of the islands, if you will be kind, Carl, just to give my community a brief understanding of how this came to be. Then we'll move into the geopolitical aspect of the tensions and the economic aspects of it. If you will.
Well, there is territorial dispute between China and Japan in the East China Sea over the Diaoyu Islands, but the main issue really is over Taiwan. All started with Taiwan, and everything started with the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 and 1895, because the Diaoyu Islands, what Japanese call Senkaku, there were a group of uninhabited islets in the East China Sea. Now, up to China was the first one to map it, give it a name, Diaoyu Islands. And then in 1885, this after Meiji reform in Japan, Japan is starting to become industrial power. They were thinking about annexing the island. The Japanese internal minister petitioned the Japanese government to annex the island of Diaoyu Islands. But at the time, the Japanese prime minister, Inoue, said, well, okay, let's hold off for a second, because, the Chinese map, Chinese already given a Chinese name, Diaoyu Island. They obviously claim it. Let's not cause our problem with China yet. This was 1885, 10 years before the First Sino-Japanese War. So, and this is internal Japanese official government document. So they put off because they are afraid to, challenging China's claim. Then what happened in 1894, 1895 is that Japan defeated China in the First Sino-Japanese War. And then as a result of that, China had to cede the island of Taiwan to Japan as a Japanese colony. So at that juncture, Japan suddenly claimed, oh, this group of islands, the Diaoyu Islands, is actually no man's land. So it didn't belong to anybody. We're going to formally incorporate it into our territory. But during the Japanese colonial rule of Taiwan, the set of island, Diaoyu Island, it was administered from the Japanese colonial governorship of Taiwan, as part of Taiwan. So, by the way, the name, the Japanese name Senkaku, is actually a literal translation from the English name, Pinnacle Islands. Senkaku is a Japanese for pinnacle. So that gives you an idea how that name originated, because the Chinese has named the island Diaoyu Islands for since before the Ming Dynasty. They put it on maps and everything, and so Japan, they took the English name from the from the maps of Pinnacle Island, they translate it into Japanese and call it Senkaku. And now, as the settlement of World War II, Japan was supposed to give up Taiwan or all the surrounding islands back to China. Now, from China's perspective, that would have included the Diaoyu Islands. But what really happened was United States was actually in actual control of the islands. The U.S. Navy was using it as for target practice. And so this is something that was not challenged by the Chiang Kai-shek regime on Taiwan, because, whatever, Chiang Kai-shek regime on Taiwan was a U.S. client state, so he didn't object to U.S. Occupation of the islands to use it for target practice. But what triggered this dispute was in 1971. So U.S. actually occupied the Okinawa island chain after World War II, and it was governed kind of under separately from Japan. And in 1971, there was a decision whether Okinawa should remain kind of under the as a U.S. colony, or should it be returned to Japan? Now, Okinawa itself the Ryukyu island chain itself also is actually tied to this dispute, because so Ryukyu is the Japanese pronunciation of Luchu, which is what the island called themselves. The Luchu island chain, they used to be an independent kingdom, and that has a very close diplomatic ties with China. It was part of the Chinese tributary system, and through the Ming and Qing dynasty, the Chinese emperors will routinely send envoys to the island to grant investiture, which is to officially confirm a new king of Luchu. And Luchu also, they concluded their own separate treaties with the United States when Commodore Perry sailed his black ship to East Asia. This is in the documents of U.S. Congress, and U.S. had treaties with the Kingdom of Luchu. So what happened is, after Meiji Restoration, Japan, became an expansionist power. So around 1870s, Empire of Japan officially annexed the kingdom of Luchu. So that's when all these territory disputes start happening with China, because before, Japan homeland did not border China directly, right? China's immediate neighbor was the Kingdom of Luchu, which is already in a tributary status within the Chinese imperial system. So there was no dispute. There was no dispute about ownership of Diaoyu Islands, because historically, according to the travel documents, travelers between China and Luchu Islands, the people say once they leave the water of Diaoyu Island, then they're heading home to Luchu Kingdom, and so because of Japan annexation of Luchu Island, that's how they start to claim Diaoyu Island as part of the the rename. So the Japanese also rename. First they refer Luchu by the Japanese pronunciation Ryukyu Islands, but then they decide to rename the main island. They decide to call Okinawa Prefecture, and so but Diaoyu Islands, for the whole entire period of the Japanese colonization of Taiwan, was administered from Taiwan, right? So this is why, from the Chinese side, they assumed that Diaoyu Island should have been returned with the other islands around Taiwan to China, but it was not challenged again by the Chiang Kai-shek regime in Taiwan, because U.S. was a daddy, right? So U.S. can make use of the island however they want. But in 1971, when United States decided to return the Ryukyu island chain to Taiwan, to Japan again, at that time, U.S. put a vote to the islanders, and the island, the people of Okinawa, they thought, by voting for return to Japanese rule, that they will get rid of the American base, because the choice was whether to remain under the American protectorship or return to Japan. And so many of them opted for returning to Japan, but to their disappointment, nothing changed. The American military stayed in Okinawa, and so they're kind of get punished. They're getting like a sort of double jeopardy. But the dispute arose when United States, when they returned Ryukyu Island administration to Japan, they included the Diaoyu Islands. So that's when, in 1971, both China, mainland China, and the regime on Taiwan protested this handover of U.S. Now, for U.S. government's official stance on this dispute, it officially takes no stance on the sovereignty issue of Diaoyu Islands, but yet they still give it to Japan. Handed the control over to Japan. And now, more recently, the United States State Department actually said, well, even though we take no stance on the sovereignty of the Diaoyu Islands, but since it's under control of Japan, you will still trigger the Japan-U.S. Security Pact if China were to militarily take over that place. So U.S. is still militarily pledged to defend the Diaoyu Islands, from China, even though it is officially it takes no stance on the sovereignty dispute. So this is like kind of strategic ambiguity, and United States intentionally kind of left a time bomb, like in the China-Japan relationship, because to let it continue to fester. And so right now, what we saw was a kind of increasing strident Japanese position on Taiwan, which is, the Japanese prime minister basically ditched the whole decade-long policy of strategic ambiguity, which is to say, for U.S., the strategic ambiguity on Taiwan is to neither confirm or deny that we're gonna get involved in a war over Taiwan, over status of Taiwan. Despite what Joe Biden said during his presidency, when he was asked, will we defend Taiwan? He said yes. But then the White House, came out and walked back to the statements like, Joe Biden didn't know what he was talking about. He was senile. Don't worry about him. But this current prime minister of Japan, she's definitely not a senile old man, right? I mean, there's no plausible deniability when she said what she said. And she, for her part, this is a long-term agenda for her. The particular faction of her party, the LDP, because she belonged to a particular right wing of the LDP, the Japanese ruling party, which has ruled Japan since most of the post World War II. Now, LDP itself is a pretty right-wing political organization, but she belonged to the right wing of the right-wing political party, right? So she's like really on the extreme part of the spectrum. And for the Japanese nationalist politicians like her, their goal has always been, quote unquote, return Japanese to the normal country status. And what they consider a normal country is that Japanese must have a military that they can deploy abroad. And this has to do with the Japan's peacetime constitution, which was imposed on them by American after World War II, which says, especially Article 9 of the Peace Constitution, which says Japan should not have a military, but you can maintain a self-defense force for the self-defense of the Japanese home islands. And the Japanese right-wing politicians did not like that at all. So they have done their best, try to skirt around the issue or overturn Article 9 of the Peace Constitution. I mean, they, back in the day of Shinzo Abe, they tried to replace it completely with by saying, Japan should be able to act like a normal country, have its own military, and deploy wherever it wants. But the peace constitution is so popular among the Japanese general population because many rightfully saw it as a key cornerstone of Japan's post-war prosperity, because they thought it was because of the pivot away from militarism of World War II that allowed Japan to achieve its economic miracle post-war. So the peace constitution is still very popular on the Japanese populace. So the Shinzo Abe government decided, you know what, if we can't get rid of it, we'll just reinterpret it. We'll just reinterpret what it means. So they say, okay, well, yes, the idea is we have to maintain a self-defense force to defend Japan, but there will be some contingencies around the neighborhood of Japan that will threaten Japan's security. In that case, we should be allowed to deploy our territory. But even in that, they were talking about Taiwan, but even back then they were very carefully not to explicitly spell out Taiwan. Even though that's what they meant. What they really meant was okay, if U.S. were to get involved in wars around Japan, as a U.S. ally, we're obligated to help. And that means we will have to send out our quote-unquote self-defense force to waters around Japan. But this current prime minister, Takaichi, she kind of ditched away with all kind of pretense and said, okay, yeah, if something happens around Taiwan, that is this existential threat to Japan, which would necessitate us to get militarily involved. Now, what this made this sound especially grating to Chinese ear is because, even before World War II, from 1931 onwards, the Empire of Japan has used the exact same excuse, saying, "Oh, we're fighting for this is an existential issue for Japan. This is why we need to send our troops to China," right? I mean, like that was their justification for their war of aggression against China. And now, hear the same language, and the Japanese prime minister threatened to send their military to waters, what China consider its own territory. That's clearly unacceptable. And this is why there was such a big issue right now that's blowing up between China and Japan. China demands the Japanese prime minister to retract her statement. And now the Japanese government is trying to wiggle their way out of it, saying well, by not continue to make such statement, we're basically retracting. Like, no, that's not what retraction means. That's not what retract.
They learning from the Americans.
So this is why this dispute is ongoing between China and Japan. But I think there's some domestic reasons for the Japanese prime minister to do what she did. And that's because Japan is facing some serious economic headwind right now. The Japanese economy is quietly imploding. This is driving the Japanese interest rate up, which is going to have a huge repercussion around the rest of the world as well, because for decades, for many years, Japanese central bank has been printing a lot of money, and they're keeping the interest rate artificially low, almost zero. So then a lot of Wall Street types, they thought, oh, this is a perfect arbitrage opportunity. We can borrow tons of Japanese yen at almost no interest rate and invest it in American stocks or bonds, which yield higher returns, and we just eat the difference. It's free money, right? So this is called the yen carry trade, which involves tons of money, borrowing tons of Japanese yen and investing in American assets. But now with sudden spikes in the Japanese interest rate, all these people who borrow Japanese yen, many of them borrow with margins. And now suddenly they realize, oh crap, we owe more money than we borrow. So now they have to repay back with higher interest. So a lot of them will have to unwind this trade. That means they have to start selling the American stocks. They have to sell them the U.S. treasuries in order to pay back the amount of the loans, the Japanese yen they have loaned. So this is going to have a huge repercussion on the American asset market as well. But for Japan, things are not looking good. They're already been hurting under the Trump tariff. They're getting, because unlike China has a continental sized economy. The export is really like a small percentage of the Chinese GDP now. For Japan, export is still a huge part of their GDP because their internal market is not big enough to absorb all of their production. So when U.S. slapped the tariff on Japanese automakers, that is an existential issue, and so Japanese economy is under all kind of pressure, and this is why I think the Japanese prime minister, want to distract his public from the very, very real economic implosion that's facing by the Japanese economy right now. And at the same time, she also is fulfilling the promise to her more extreme right supporters, like, hey, I can be tough on China. Look at me. I'm dishing away all the strategic ambiguity. I'm telling them we're going to deploy the Japanese military to the water of Taiwan. And so this and in addition to that, there's another dimension is the Japan-U.S. security pact, because the Japanese right wing has made that the cornerstone of their policy for the past few decades. And they thought that, because they have profited from it. Japan basically profited from being the junior partner of the U.S. empire in the East Asia. And what they saw as a result of the Xi-Trump meeting in Korea was there's a temporary truce in the tariff war. And they're reading the leaves to see which way the wind blows, and it looks like U.S. is doing a temporary pivot from a direct confrontation with China to consolidate its grips on power elsewhere, like Latin America or Africa. Right. This is why Trump is talking about is now concentrating on Venezuela. Now they're talking about Christian genocide in Nigeria, that they're gonna possibly do a military intervention. And for Japan, that's particularly the Japanese right-wing politician, that's bad news. If the U.S. leaves, they will be the one holding the bag to face the resurgent China. They don't want that. So this is a way to create a crisis in order to drag United States back. So force these Western politicians come out and to say, oh, we're in solidarity with Japan. We stand in support of Japan against China. Right. This is under this kind of backdrop. Trump now gives a call to Takaichi, and which, according to Wall Street Journal, depending on how much you believe the Wall Street Journal reporting nowadays, is that Trump told Takaichi to calm the F down, right? To chill out. And I think that is kind of the my reading of the whole ruckus. But I think this is in a way what Japan is doing is not that dissimilar from what the Europe is doing. When the European leaders claiming, oh, you know what, if the U.S. is going to wrap up the Ukraine war, no problem. We're going to do it alone. We're going to carry on the burden of supplying Ukraine. I mean, which is preposterous. Nobody believes that. But what they're really trying to do is try to prolong the crisis, trying to drag United States back in. They don't want U.S. to leave, so they're the ones holding the bag, end up holding the bag. So I think that's what's going on with Japan.
Well, I'm glad you addressed the historical aspect, Carl, of the Diaoyu Islands, because a lot of people do not know the background story of this. I had it on a good authority, and I read some. I saw, as a matter of fact, I wish I could have kept I saw a picture, not a picture, a picture of sort from an old archives from way back of where the island was part of China at that time, the empires and so forth. And that in itself, later on, the Japanese start to push against that one, but it was on the record there. And I'm glad you explained this one, at least from a historical perspective. One other thing I wanted to mention, since you brought up the idea of her being on the far right, I knew about her before she became. I read something that she was a hawkish, a Chinese hawkish. I had no idea why she will be till I found out that her protege was none other than Shinzo Abe. And if we know the history of what happened between Shinzo Abe and Chinese a few years ago when he went to the memorial place, you remember that incident, right? And that right there, I put the two and two together and figured she's not up to anything good.
And there's a lot of, and she is part of the Japanese right wing that is in active support of historical revisionism. Because recently Takaichi visited Malaysia, right? And first she went to pay respect to a cemetery of the Japanese soldiers fallen in the Malaya campaign in Malaysia. And then she went to, so she's Japanese, she should do that.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. So but then she went to visit to another memorial, which was erected to the British under during the Malayan emergency. Now, the Malayan emergency was the anti-colonial war when the British were trying to maintain their control over their colony of British Malaya, which at that time it was between the British colonial authority and the Malayan Communist Party, right? And the Malayan Communist Party now has a very heavy ethnic Chinese component, and this is because the Malayan Communist Party came into being during the resistance against the Japanese colonial rule during World War II. Now, when Japan first came to take over Southeast Asia after Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Army specifically singled out ethnic Chinese in Southeast Asia, because a lot of these ethnic Chinese, they have been in support of their homeland struggle against the Japanese aggression. They've been sending a lot of money. Some of them even volunteered to go back to China to fight the Japanese. So when Japan took over Southeast Asia, they specifically targeted the Chinese community in Southeast Asia, whether in British Malaya, Singapore, or Dutch East Indies, and so this caused a lot of these ethnic Chinese population to join the resistance against the Japanese, and at that time was led by the Malayan Communist Party, and so, but after the war, after Japanese surrender, initially the British supported the insurgency against Japan, but when the British came back, it's like British okay, you commies have to give up your weapons, and so this started the anti-colonial struggle, and that's called the Malayan insurgency, and so Takaichi knew this history, yet he went to the memorial to the British soldiers in the Malayan insurgency, and then what she's trying to do is trying to link up the two. It's like, hey, look, we the Japanese and we the Western democratic allies, see, we fought on the same side. we fought those commie Chinese, you see. We're part of the same struggle, which is complete historical revisionism of what happened in World War II, right? I mean, like, but that's the type of the kind of the party ideology she represents. She's appealing to kind of the anti-communism part of the West to see, hey, like we're actually allies together in this. So this is. It's very unfortunate that this is gonna throw a wrench into the China-Japan relationship for a long time.
For sure,
I just don't see how this is gonna resolve anytime soon.
For sure. I mean, to me, Carl, it shows literally lack of diplomatic maturity. That's basically what I put it. For a prime minister, and there's knowing, and I am sure she does, knowing the history of what took place in Nanjing, for example, 1931 all the way to 1945. I mean, I was there. I went on the ground. And I saw those images in the museum. I mean, heartbreaking. I can't even talk much about all that. It's just the idea of a prime minister will provoke another country that never forget those scars. You're talking about ancestors of Chinese people that have been sacrificing and been sacrificed and been sort of died in a horrible manners. And just for her to come and say that way, that's just, to me, let alone when you look at the history of Japanese prime ministers, none of them, to my knowledge, none of them ever crossed that red line publicly. Never, to my knowledge. Shinzo Abe did what he did with the memorial visits and so forth. I want to tackle one aspect of this beside the geopolitical aspects, because we're going to talk about the Chinese response from the bigger picture, and we'll get into that. For now, I wanted to ask, from an economic perspective. Did Japan think, did this Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, did she think about the economic consequences, knowing, for example, and I'll give the example of rare earth elements. Japan doesn't produce rare earth elements. Japan doesn't process rare earth elements. And it has an electronic capacity production, which needs access to rare earth elements. Chinese is going to cut off that. That's it. Why they didn't think in terms of an economic implications of such provocation, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think these politicians really care about economics. I mean, why did Trump launch the trade war, right? I mean, like that.
Right.
I think they're more concerned about in immediate terms, whether to win popular support among their voter base, whether to curry favor with their, with their master in Washington, or whether to maintain their hold on power. I think that's more has more priority than how the economy is going, because the Japanese economy already took an immediate hit when Japanese GDP, 7% of Japanese GDP is tourism, and Chinese tourists represent one of the largest segment of tourists coming to Japan. And so, they only second after South Korea. So a lot of the Chinese tourists already canceled their flights to Tokyo, their planned vacation. So that's going to hit a lot of the Japanese economy immediately. Yeah. And then there was reporting of Japan trying to seek U.S. help in furthering semiconductor sanction against China. Because there's a lot of Japanese. Yeah, there's a lot of Japanese company that's supplying components, semiconductor production components to China. So they thought, okay, but we cannot do it alone. We're going to need the help of the United States. Yeah. But again, China already showed they have the ultimate trump card, which is rare earth. They cut off the rare earth. That's it. There's no more modern industrial production. And I think Trump understood that. Trump understood that after the trade war, when China started playing the rare earth card. And I think Japan is gonna have to learn the hard way.
Yeah, for sure. There is one aspect of one behavior from the governor of Taiwan. What's his name? Li Chang-te. I think he was eating some sushi or something, just to agitate the Chinese, because what he was saying is that, hey, I'm going to be, I know, Carl, I saw that and I was like, what the heck? What's wrong with this guy?
They just lifted the ban on Japanese seafood just after this incident, right? Taiwan had maintained a ban on Japanese seafood since the Fukushima incident up till now, and now the quote-unquote president of Taiwan trying to cash on some points by lifting the Taiwan ban on Japanese seafood, and he publicly went on eating the seafood from Japan. That reminds me of that Obama, drinking the water from Flint, Michigan.
That's a good one. Yes, Obama did.
Yeah,
I remember that.
But this is not going to make a dent. The level of seafood import from Japan to Taiwan, that doesn't even compare to the amount the Chinese market consumes. The largest market is still China. There's no way they're gonna make up for the loss of the Chinese market. Like no matter how much Fukushima sushi you're gonna consume, it's not gonna compete with the amount that you lost by losing the Chinese market. Just like the American soybean farmer found out.
Oh yeah. Now the farmers are pissed here. I mean, once again, as I mentioned, the media is not disclosing, but the farmers are pissed at Trump. So forget about no, they don't care because their livelihood. As a matter of fact, Carl, I did read through a private investigator. He's not affiliated with any. I wish I could have kept the link. I read that some farmers here are now taking their own lives. I was heartbroken when I read that. I was, I can only imagine a farmer taking his own life, leaving a family behind, but because he couldn't take it anymore with the losing there, because the Chinese not buying their stuff anymore, and because Trump caused that one. So straightforward.
That kind of news you only read before from like India. Like there was
Yeah.
like a lot of news report of Indian farmers commit suicide because
Suicide
they're
too.
crushed by debt. Yeah, by debt. But now, man, like United States is becoming
Yeah, we
a
have it
third
here.
world country.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so sad. It's so sad. So